Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Stories of CSCA, the podcast. You will have heard some pre-conference conversations with the organizers of the Central States Communication Association. Prior to the conference, we are now post-conference and following up with some of the participants to hear about what really stuck with them from this experience, this wonderful gathering, the ideas that they're still playing with, the research they themselves got to present, and kind of what it meant for them to gather and come together around this idea of translate. Today, I am speaking with Xianlin Jin of University of Toledo. Xianlin, who is the recipient of the Communication Studies Article of the Year Award, which I will let her tell you all about. But Xianlin, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. And would you mind introducing yourself and your work, your article that you won the award for?
Of course, it's my honor, and I have to be honest with you. It's a surprise for me as well. So, hello everyone. My name is Xianlin Jin. I'm an associate professor at the Department of Communication and Media at the University of Toledo. This year, of course, that's a big surprise. I celebrated the Communication Studies Article for the Year Award with my collaborators and my dear friends at CSCA. When I started working on this paper, that was a couple of years ago, at that time there was a national level public health crisis that's related to the baby formula shortage. So some of you may remember that crisis. So at that time, I was thinking, okay, so this is such a big public health crisis, and it particularly relates to women, mother, parents, and children. And I have been doing some research to explore the information dissemination on the internet, particularly social media, regarding crisis. And so when I was doing this research, I was thinking, probably parents, especially mothers, voice should be heard on the larger social media platform regarding this national level baby formula shortage crisis. And a surprise, after I actually collect the data about this crisis from X, formerly Twitter, and I did social network analysis to explore who is in the central position in this network to control information flow. So particularly, I calculated between centrality, which measures the shortest path for this user to reach any random users in the network. And we analyzed the between centrality and identify the top 20 influencers in this crisis information network. We also identified the top links have been shared by those influencers, and those top links or articles have been circulated in this entire network. And I did further content analysis to make a comparison. Are there any similarities between the things emerged in the articles or links, etc., have been shared by the influencers versus the articles, links have been circulated in this network? And we realized information influencers, they not only control information dissemination, the information flow, they also, to some extent, they control the themes, the content of this big crisis have been circulated on X, which is formerly Twitter. And I was like, wow, this is fascinating. And we realized actually parents, especially women's voices, are not being heard much on this issue. And interestingly, politicians and mass media outlets have been the dominant voice in this case. And we also notice one interesting pattern is, like, for example, if I ask you, where do you hear this news? where do you hear the story about baby formula shortage? You probably say, oh, I read it on Twitter. I read it on Instagram, Facebook, etc. And if I ask you a follow-up question, do you remember which user posted this? Do you recall that information?
Probably not. No.
No, yeah. We remember the platform.
Yes.
It's either Twitter, right now we call it X, Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok. But we don't remember the exact information resource. So the we hardly distinguish the information platform from information resource in this social media area.
Right.
I think that is very interesting finding as well.
That is so very interesting. And I really appreciate what seems really important about what you've shared is not just what you found in the research, but how it compares to your expectation of what you had going in, that it was really different. And that speaks to something interesting. And I have this, this year's CSCA theme of translate on my mind. So I'm wondering about how this, how you translate this, in terms of extrapolating it to other situations or talking about what this means for people, how they might better interact with information or, be more conscious stewards of information online, that the reality of our communication, I think, is many times very different than our expectation or assumption, especially those of us who are communication scholars. What we would think would be the best communication or make the most sense or be the most effective or generative is not always what is happening in reality. And so that's a really interesting space, I think, that you have explored, the distance kind of between the reality and the expectation. So going back to the CSCA theme of translate this year, I'm curious how this research that you've done for years has culminated in this article, which is incredible. And I should say the title, What and Where Do I Learn About the Baby Formula Shortage Crisis, Exploring Crisis Communication Patterns, Influencers, and Information Resources. And I'll include that link so people can, find your paper easily. But how are you continuing to translate that work, or how is it continuing to inspire you as you look towards what's next?
Thank you. That's a great question. First, I will talk about how we translate research into practice or into the real world. I have to say, before I working in academia, I actually worked in government agencies. I used to work at Arizona Department of Health Services to conduct a community-based research project, particularly focused on the smoking issues of Asian immigrants. And at that time, I remember that goes back to translation as well. So at that time, Arizona Department has difficulty of building collaborations and with Asian immigrant communities, and what they did was simply translate the English material into Chinese, into Korean, into several other Asian languages, and translation doesn't mean cultural interpretation.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's a big issue there. So if you simply translate what you have prepared for English audience into a different language and expect people in a different cultural community will fully appreciate or understand and be persuaded by those materials will be I was that's the issue. That's why it has not been successful. So what I did is that I actually spent a lot of time visiting people, talking to people, those people who work at nonprofits, serving local Asian communities. They work at Chinese schools, churches, and they are community leaders who are well respected by other community members. So I spent a lot of time building connections with those people and organizations. And then I understand those major concerns, the obstacles, and then I conducted interviews. I designed a service based on my understandings and the interactions, what I learned from those important people. So it's not me stepping immediately saying, stepping in, said like, "Hey, I'm the expert. I know how to do research. Let me design this 50 question surveys and distribute to people, and then test whether my hypotheses are supported." That's not how I approach this issue. And that goes back to translation. Like when we translate research into practice, I think one thing that I learned based on my past experience is that I have to be very humble regarding, okay, not putting myself as I'm the expert, I know how to do things, rather than like listening to people and understanding their situation, their struggles, their concerns, and their cultures. And so that I think means a lot. And when I done another job that is at an international research organization, co-sponsored by the United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction Office and the International Science Council. So you sound like, oh, we are the top notch, right? But actually, we have to work with different stakeholders. We work with those researchers, scientists around the world. I also work with those communities who lack resource, and we work with those important policy makers. So during this procedure, I need to translate research findings into the language that community members can understand. In bullet points, what we need to do when hurricane hits or when flood happens, right? And what's the pre-crisis protocols we can prepare, and what during crisis management we need to focus, and what post-crisis lessons we need to learn and implement in the future to reduce risk. We also need to communicate with those policymakers who may not have the background knowledge to understand all those jargons that we have in the research fundings, right? So that's another type of translation.
Oh, yeah.
And we all know those policymakers, governors, they usually very busy. They have a short time reserved for us. So I have to make sure like we can convey the key findings and persuade them to support this type of research in the future, just in probably 10 minutes presentation. So yeah, that guides my research. So my research is very theory driven, but very applied. So what I can do with my research for the community I'm living, the community I'm supporting, right? So in this case, we have been studying crisis communication for long time with my collaborators. I should have given credits for my co-authors, Dr. Patrick Spence at University of Central Florida and Dr. Ken Lachlan from University of Connecticut. So when we started doing crisis communication research, we are particularly looking at, okay, so how people seek information when they are in really emergency and disturbance situation like a crisis. You know, like people feel a lot of uncertainty. They don't know how to handle the situation. What should I do? What should I not do, right? And in this case, we look at the information resource and the information influencers who impact people's decision making. Right? And we also look at the bigger picture here. So because we usually have this traditional approach of like interviewing people post crisis and ask them to recall what happened, what you done, and the possible issue of this approach is that when we recall something, we may not memorize it correctly.
Sure,
I may add something to my story.
Especially if it's in crisis, yeah.
In crisis, yes. So it's so stressful, so uncertainty.
Yeah.
So I propose, okay, people have been using social media for all kinds of issues and purpose. It's not only for entertainment. And our studies have shown that social media is a very important platform to seek information and also share information during crisis. And that's also another recommendation we have proposed in our studies, is that those relevant organizations who are responsible for the crisis or who have the responsibilities to educate the public to reduce the risk should use social media as a good tool and platform to share accurate information, prompt information, because we know when crises happen, there are always conspiracy theories, misinformation, rumors going on, right? So that's the important platform that those organizations should take advantage of and should use this channel to reach their target audience.
That I think there's so much richness in what you just said. And just one thing I want to pull out of it that I'm hearing is, especially as researchers, as scholars, there's maybe a temptation to, well, like spend years kind of bringing this thing together and then write the paper and then kind of say, okay, that was that. But these things that we're sharing, and every communication has an afterlife, it lives on. And so I appreciate you bringing in the perspective of, we have some responsibility in that afterlife. Like you said, it's not, okay, we translated this to a different language, wash our hands of it, we're done with it. But there's more work to be done in terms of, making sure that communication is really effective. So thank you so much for sharing all that. As we wrap up, is there anything else that you want to share about your experience at CSCA this year?
Oh yeah, so actually, I'm very honored and to be elected and selected as the Equity and Inclusion Community member at CSCA. So I'm very excited for this great opportunity to, I would say, like not only contribute my expertise, but also show we actually work as a group to make sure that this community is supportive and inclusive to everyone.
Wonderful. Congratulations. And thanks so
Thank
much
you.
for having this conversation with me and sharing your research.
Of course, I really enjoy our conversation. Thank you.